everyone. Thank you for coming on this bleak, dark April night. I don't know. I'm so over this weather. So thank you for coming out to see Kristen Arnett tonight. I'm a big believer that all stories should contain humor. When I say this in workshop, my students look at me skeptically with very withering, very intellectual looks, rife with ennui, that scream, "I'm a serious writer. I don't do funny." Here's the thing, though. Humor is an essential part of life, and it's part of what it means to be human. And often that's what fiction is contending with, the sticky, agonizing, and funny mess that is life. In this way, humor is really not just at the heart of fiction, but at the heart of what it means to be a human being. But let me clarify when I say humor. I'm not asking my students to pad their stories with a tight 5-minute stand-up set. What I want them to do is to consider levity on the page, to consider how we find a way to inject a breeze into a story that can feel like melodrama when what we're really aiming for is pathos. Author Brian Kitely says, "Humor works best when it's exploring the tragedy of the situation, and there is inherent tragedy in stories, and that's partly what makes them funny." What it really gets at is one of our most basic tenets in writing fiction, which is juxtaposition. In fiction, humor can come from the juxtaposition of two things or people that don't belong together. For example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or let's say, frenetic sex with a birthday party clown, which is the first scene in Kristen's new book. Frankly, humor is also a powerful way to embed an argument into fiction. It allows the writer to consider the ways that injecting a moment of levity without malevolence or a seeming agenda can ask the reader to laugh at the absurdity of a situation in a way that makes them think. And when times are dark, it is humor that can sometimes be the most effective tool. Another Southern writer, Flannery O'Connor, is best known for writing the Southern grotesque. And yet, one of her funniest stories is also her darkest. A Good Man is Hard to Find. It's about the murder of a family by a known killer. The story is pulled along by a busybody grandmother who has no self-awareness, who judges her family, who demands and complains, and who leads them astray to their eventual deaths. After she too has been killed, after annoying both her family and the reader for the entire story, her killer, the misfit, says, "She would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life." And we can chuckle and agree. Humor is a way to show transformation and to provide an emotional release valve for the most difficult of situations. And this, in part, is what is at the heart of Kristen Arnett's work, the way humor can help both through pain and affirm that life, no matter how difficult, has light. This is especially true of Kristen's most recent book, Stop Me If You've Heard This One. The reviews of it get at the heart of this. The New York Times says it's a funny, heartfelt tale of one woman grappling with grief, love, and how to move forward. Kirkus Review said, a funny and tender novel about life's best and worst punchlines. And Lauren Vanderberg said, brilliant on the relationship between comedy and suffering and on the bravado and vulnerability of performance. In her seminal book on writing, Mystery and Manners, Flannery O'Connor says, either one is serious about salvation or one is not. And it is well to realize the maximum amount of seriousness admits the maximum amount of comedy. Only if we are secure in our beliefs can we see the comical side of the universe. I think this is one of Kristen's true gifts as a writer. She's secure in her navigation of Florida as a place, of her characters as people, to make them both sad and silly, both tragic and comic, both beautiful and grotesque. Stop Me If You've Heard This One was named the most anticipated book of the year by People Magazine, Vogue, the New York Times, the Today Show, the Washington Post, the AV Club, Bustle, Autostraddle, the Millions, Lit Hub, and many, many more. Kristen Arnett is a third-generation Floridian and is also the author of With Teeth, a novel that was the finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Fiction, the New York Times bestselling Mostly Dead Things, and she's been awarded fellowships from the Shearing Fellowship at the Black Man's Institute and has had residencies at the Ragdale Foundation, the Vermont Studio Center, the Millay Colony, and the studios of Key West. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Vogue, The Cut, Oprah Magazine, PBS Newshour, The Guardian, Salon, and The Washington Post. Please join me in welcoming Kristen Arnett.
Oh my God, I love you. The studios at Key West is where Dion and I met for the first time. You know when you meet somebody and immediately go, oh, we're friends now, even if the other person doesn't, you don't know if they reciprocate that. That's what I did to her there. Thank you. I love that you had Flannery. If you want to listen to A Good Man Is Hard to Find, Flannery reading it, you can Google that and it comes up on YouTube, but it's her reading the entire story to an audience full of people, I think, in Milledgeville. And yeah, it's a deeply funny, deeply weird story, but it opens with her being like, the grandmother did not want to go to Florida. And the audience is like loving it, like eating from the palm of her hand, laughing until you reach that midway point in the story where they can start to go like, wait a minute here, is someone about to get murdered? And yes, it's an entire family. But it's like I think like when I think about like what makes something funny or like thinking about humorous writing, I do think a lot about like writers that maybe people think of as being like deeply serious, like Flannery, who like Mystery Manners is her essay collection, but her collected letters is called Habit of Being, and I think it's like an incredibly wonderful read if you're willing to sit down and read like 400 pages of like personal letters from her and other people, also talking a lot about God and religion and like her idea of writing. But she's also like deeply funny and self-deprecating in those letters. And in one point she says to like a friend, somebody had taken like her picture for the newspaper, and she described the way that picture looked as if she had bitten her own grandmother. That's how that looked. And I was just like, there's just like things that are funny and everything. Anyway, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. I hope I bring like a little Florida sunshine with me here. I was outside and I was like, what is that in the sky? I've seen snow like 6 times in my life. So I feel very happy to be here today to talk to you. I'm gonna read some different sections from this book. I'm not gonna tell you anything other than this is a book about a lesbian birthday party clown in Central Florida who's trying to take her act to the next level because she considers it artistry. Also, she's very much into older women. You know that classic story we all know. So I'm just gonna read some small sections and maybe talk like briefly as it like interspersed with like ideas about like writing these like portions of the book. Anyway. To ward off boredom at my part-time job, I like to compile lists of facts. This activity serves as a distraction from the creep of time as I wait for my upcoming audition and wonder if any of my dreams will ever come to fruition or if I'll be stuck restocking dusty shelves for the rest of my natural life. The lists comprise 2 specific categories that I consider crucial to clowning: things that are funny and things that are not funny. The selection process is more complicated than you might think. Consider this. A person's best ideas and their worst ideas live in their heads simultaneously. The good and the bad are like prizes stuffed in a gumball machine. Those ideas can sit there for years, all mixed together, waiting for someone to eject them into the world. When you finally put in that quarter and turn the dial, out comes something, but you can't guarantee it's going to be a good idea or even a funny one. When I make these dueling lists of funny and not funny, I distill what makes the brain tick down to its most basic elements. Jokes have a finite shelf life, and comedy exists on a timeline. It can morph and expand, but it can also fold in on itself. Consider pop culture, movies, or TV shows with catchphrases that started as hilarious, but after a period of time become an annoying din that a person must learn to tolerate instead of enjoy. A laugh passed between friends might retain a certain zest long after it was shared, but mostly it's the nostalgia of the moment that flavors it, not the joke itself. You aren't remembering the humor of the gag, you're remembering the good feeling you shared with that person. It's the funny that comes after the funny, the tinge of comedy left behind in the glass like humorous residue. Things that start off not funny can quite easily shift to funny too. Sometimes all it takes is time. For instance, take my job at Aquarium Select 3. There is no like Aquarium Select 1. There's only Aquarium Select 2 and 3, which to me was funny. When I pulled into the lot that morning and saw the store, I stopped for a moment and considered the basic facts. There's the same hideous mural out front with its deformed whales and monstrous sea creatures and dank, chipped paint, the same obnoxious boss inside waiting to yell at me, the same plethora of jumbled tank detritus for sale. All the regular things that usually fill my day with horror suddenly take on a new light when I consider the addition of an unknown factor, the customer. People who wander into the store are the changeable variable in this jokey mathematic equation. How they interact with the space and how I choose to interact with them can become a brand new joke every time I punch in the formula. Sitting there in the lot, dreading my day and staring at the ocean mural from hell, I came to a decision. Because of the upcoming audition and because I think my mental health deserves it, I'm going to start numbering my days at Aquarium Select 3. Every time I arrive for a shift, it'll be a variation of the same joke. How many ways can I tell it and still glean humor from the bit? Today is Aquarium Select 4, I think, and pray that I can keep the funny from becoming not funny again. Can I take a peek at your inverts? Someone says from behind me. I whirl around. Excuse me. The man's older than me, not by a lot. He's got on a suit that's wearing him instead of the other way around. Navy blue with white pinstripes that might have been considered nice by Sears standards 15 years ago. His hair's gelled up and away from his face in a style that was wildly popular in early aughts boy bands. Your inverts, he repeats. Can I see them? Normally, a guy being a pervert would be something I would unequivocally file under not funny. But today, I decide to make it funny for myself by yelling at him. Hey, asshole, I don't know what your problem is, but I don't make enough money at this job to put up with creeps. Whoa! He backs up abruptly, knocking into a tall rack of ceramic turtles. They're hand-painted in a variety of aggressive hues, neon orange and magenta and lemon yellow. Mr. Manager is dating the guy who creates them? As far as I know, we've never sold one. Today, staring at a particular turtle that has flippers attached to its back like some kind of Teenage Mutant Ninja ripoff, I find them funny. What does your wife think about you hassling women who make minimum wage? What? Take your inverts garbage someplace else, I reply. I'm not in the mood. He's got his hands up like I'm about to physically attack him. I just wanted to ask about your hermit crabs. I saw them on your website. Hermit crabs? It's for my daughter? He attempts to smile, his teeth, which are short and dark, the kind of teeth that have seen way too much black coffee in their lifetime, wink out at me. Invertebrates, you know, inverts? Shit. Now that he said it for the third time, the name sounds vaguely familiar. Definitely part of all that employee training I've relegated to the recycling bin at the back of my brain. Yeah, okay, sure. I think we still have one left. I can show you. We head to the back of the store where we keep all the short-term fare that usually moves fast, the occasional hamster or corn snake or poison dart frog. In the far corner, I spot the terrarium that holds the hermit crabs. The one that's left is small and shy, half buried in the silica play sand. The bin smells like a mixture of mildew and peanut butter. Someone slathered the entire front wall of the case with it. Bits of gunky apples sit clumped in the bottom. Not funny, I think, wondering how long the crab's been left there to rot. Do you need info on these? I ask, handing him the terrarium. Because I can get my manager. I'm not incredibly familiar with inverts. No, my daughter's done all of it. I feel like I know everything about them now. She can't stop talking about them. He laughs and it puts me at ease. He likes his kid, which isn't funny or not funny, but instead is just genuinely sweet. He's here because he supports her. He cares about what his daughter likes. I know it's kind of dirty, I admit. I feel bad this one's so scrawny. Are you sure you don't want to wait for a new shipment? I can take him. He holds up the case and peers inside. It looks like he could use a new home. Thank you, I say, which embarrasses me further. For some reason, I feel like it's my messy home the guy walked into, and instead of making fun of me for the unwashed dishes and the overflowing garbage, he's gracefully ignoring it. The situation has officially gone back to funny again. My laugh becomes sounding like a wet cough. Luckily for me, the guy doesn't seem to notice. Katrina will love it, he says. We walk back up to the front and he pays for everything. I charge only half price for the hermit crab because I feel 75% certain it'll die before the week is out. Not funny. You look really familiar, except it was funny to y'all. You look really familiar, he says as I pass him his receipt. Do we know each other? I really don't want to tell him that he looks like every white business dad of a certain age. Their faces blur together. Funny. I don't think so. Are you sure? Because I could swear. He peers at me a moment longer, then suddenly slaps his hand down on the counter, scaring the shit out of me and the hermit crab, who rolls backward and into his shell so quickly I worry we might have cut his already short life expectancy by at least half. You're Dwight's sister. I don't say anything, but I'm sure I look surprised. Yeah, Dwight, he repeats. We were on crew together back in high school. The rat that runs my brain roots through the file cabinets to hold my memories. I don't remember most of my brother's friends because I was 8 years younger than him, and high school teens don't really give two shits about hanging out with little kids. The guy who knows my dead brother tells me that his name is John. He holds out his hand and I shake it limply, still reeling from the cataclysmic shift from funny back to not funny. Guy named John who knew my dead brother. And from the way that he's talking about Dwight, he doesn't know that my brother is dead. That's a whole other level of very not funny. Man, Dwight's little sister, small world, he smiles. emails. That guy is hands down the funniest dude I've ever met. Yeah, I say funny. Okay. So, oh, thank you. There's like sections of this book where I was like, I wanted to play with shape and form. So that particular chapter, I was very interested in, and my publisher let me do this, so thank you, Riverhead. But it was like, I wanted it to be very specific in terms of font and spacing about how that would work. So they let me have like the typeface for funny and not funny be set to like a very specific thing. So as you move through that chapter, it has these like bold and very specific funny and not funny that jump out to the reader's eyes. So something you may not have caught will catch you then. And it also was like very important to me to be like, funny things happen in terms of interactions with other people, right? Like funny things can happen on our own, but it's like who we come into contact to, like informs like how the joke can be a variable. And since I'm writing very specifically about somebody who is a clown for their job and constantly caters and performs for a very specific audience, it was like a nice way to kind of set up a kind of like weird who's on first, I guess. This is a clown who's also, her name is Cherry. She's very philosophical about the idea of humor, but also is 28 years old, so she has her own like ideas, but also hasn't lived like a very full life yet. So there's like portions that I read where this is like that I wrote where her like kind of thinking about the idea of like what clowning means in the grander scheme of like life, but also art and humor. Sometimes it's hard to take off the clown. Okay, so I'm Bunko. I've slathered on the grease paint and slid into my 2 big shoes and popped on the bright red nose and donned my party-colored wig. I've got my stash of gadgets and magic tricks and party favors. Here's my miniature rhinestone cowboy hat, jaunty as a wink. Snap on my white gloves, gut-busted, padded rear end, powdered and neon and grinning. I've described the costume, not the clown. The costume is purely physical. The clown is a persona that takes years to craft, if not decades. You develop it gradually through trial and error, and by the time you're done, the clown is inside you for good. At any given moment, mine sits waiting inside the cramped clown car of my skeleton, pushing impatiently at the door of my ribcage, wanting out so it can really start fooling around. The clown doesn't care if I'm on a date or attending a funeral. The clown is my id, greedy and impatient, and uncaring of the mess it might make in its quest to get off a good joke. Any asshole off the street can slap on a polka dot tie and juggle some oranges and claim to be something they're not. To be a real clown, you must accept that it changes you into something hard and occasionally cruel. Jokes aren't always sweet. Take, for example, the court jester. A role meant to entertain only the king, the jester finds ways to make his ruler laugh, often at the expense of others, but always at the expense of himself. In order to perfect my art, I must let it swallow me whole. The part that is my authentic self shrinks down so that the clown can grow in its place. I lose myself. That's the price I pay for art. To clown well, you must embrace the light smile and the dark heart. Okay, so yeah, some of this is like, right, like moments of like her like thinking about that, kind of like she's 28 and she's like, it takes decades to perfect. I'm like, it's decades. So some of this too is like, you bring up a really good point about like the idea of like, when I was first like starting out writing, I wanted to be taken very seriously. Some of that was like, I had like a non-traditional, I talked about this like in the class earlier, like I had like a non-traditional kind of school experience where I had a child when I was a teenager and then raised him as a single mom and then came out. So, you know, that also classic story. And I was like in Florida and I was writing and I was like working full time and going to school at night and writing stories, applying to workshops and wanting people to take me seriously. And some of that stuff was like, to be taken seriously, one must be serious about their art and craft. So like learning things and wanting to like be seen as somebody who was a serious artist. And something that was like really helpful to me was I was like at Tin House workshop. It was my first year. I had like my pad and pen. I was writing on everything people said. Like it was like a nugget of gold, like no matter what. And I was at like a lecture by Matt Johnson, and he was talking very much about, because Matt's a really funny dude. He's a great writer. He's a funny guy. And he was talking about when he had gotten out of grad school, he was sitting and he was like, I'm gonna write my serious novel. And so he'd write these things and then show them to his writer friends and be like, you know, here, like Matt's biracial and was like, you know, writing about like this experience of being biracial in America and like kind of historical fiction. And he would show it to his friends and his friends would be like, this is good writing, but like, you're funny. Like, where are you in this? And he's like, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to be a serious, capital S, serious artiste. And so he was like, and everybody kept talking to me and being like, this feels interesting, but it doesn't feel like it's doing what it's supposed to do. And so a thing he started doing was, he asked his friends this, he wasn't being a creep, but he was like, can I record our conversations and how we talk to each other? And his friends were like, I guess, weirdo, but like, yeah, so he recorded conversations and then would transcribe them as they happened in real life, like how you talk to people where, you interrupt yourself, you interrupt your friend, some of the things you already know so you don't say, like that leave out like gaps in conversation. And as he was writing these things down, it helped him with, first of all, writing dialogue, which can be tricky when we're writing like how people actually talk to each other. But he also was like, things can be funny and not funny at the same time. Like I can write serious art and also have it be completely absurd or really weird, or have something incredibly goofy happen, and that's also serious art too, because serious art embraces the light and the dark, like all these things sit together. It's a fun trick for yourself if you like feel like doing it, is like ask your friends if you can record them and then transcribe afterwards. It's a fun like kind of craft practice. This is also very much a book that's like Florida based, so I'm going to read this little section that's very specifically like Orlando. The weather is classic Florida, spring blue skies and sticky humidity. A day not unlike today here. I have the windows and my Firebird rolled down, the hot breath of an afternoon breeze caressing my bare arms. The jumpsuit feels good on me, almost like I'm not wearing clothes, and I turn the music up way too loud as I speed down the back roads faster than I should, the palm scrub giving over into wide fields dotted with cattle, those fields becoming vacant lots of punky dry grass strewn with the dandruff of garbage and abandoned cars, the lots expanding into thick strands of pine and oak trees, more scrub, and then a sudden break of brackish water. Stagnant mess in a wide ditch full of fecund life, snakes and slick-scaled fish and long-necked egrets. What's funny to a bird, I wonder, as several crows lift from a slender pine, lighting in perfect symmetry along a nearby electric wire. It dips beneath their combined weight, looking like a blackened grin with rotted blackbirds for teeth. They're chattering to themselves about the car speeding past, flying faster than any bird they've ever seen. In that moment, I'm the essence of something much bigger, joyful and wholly alive, and when I laugh as loud as I want, there's the clown inside, overflowing with glee. I'm my own audience, first and foremost. Shouldn't all things funny start out with a joke that's just for me? The library's downtown. It's early enough that I have time to park next to the lake and take a quick stroll, maybe grab a drink. Enjoy a bit of beauty before I head inside and potentially ruin whatever's been brewing with a woman I like by simply being myself. It's the golden hour, that time in Florida I love best, when everything slows down and the damp air is tinged with a sweet, holy light. I almost never come downtown proper. Usually it's all nightlife and the sour smell of piss, drunk people buying late-night hot dogs from carts in the middle of the street. It's easy to forget how lovely the lake and the greenery can be. At a nearby convenience store, I grab a bag of chips coated with a radioactive orange powder and a tall boy that has the heft of a newborn infant. The cashier takes one look at me and immediately inserts the beer directly into his own slender brown bag. He's right, I'm gonna drink it exactly where I shouldn't. The sun's sunk behind a tall wall of office buildings. I follow the curve of the lake while I eat my chips and drink my beer and try not to stain my jumpsuit. A street performer with a plastic bucket for donations is stationed next to the amphitheater. He is miming. Poorly. Sometimes he forgets that he's not supposed to speak, and he whispers the word for whatever he's doing with his body, pulling a rope, finding himself trapped inside a box, peeling a carrot with an especially dull knife, and accidentally nicking himself with the blade. Because I understand how hard it is to mime effectively, something I worked at for literal years and still don't do all that well, I decide to sub into the secondary role as few people leave without even clapping. Dropping a handful of loose change into his bucket, I tell him the plan. I'll be the dummy. Ready? He nods. This close, I can see that he's even younger than I thought underneath all that white paint. If I had more time, I'd talk him through the makeup process, but for now, it's good enough that I'm there as his prop. Moving into position, I sit in front of him on an imaginary chair. This requires serious leg muscles, ones I've worked on through countless hours of squatting as I build balloon animals, ready myself for somersaults, and perform all the slapstick routines I've honed that purposely put me face to face with my audience. That's another thing about clowning, it fucks up your back like nothing else. From behind, the mime takes my hands and positions them both above my head like a ballerina. Then as soon as he lets go, I drop both arms like they weigh 1,000 pounds. Immediately titters from the audience, this new set is working. He feigns frustration and then poses me again. The arms fall, this time one smacking him in the side of the head. He lifts me up and poses one of my legs, which I allow to crumple under me. He spins me to the right, and I pivot back to the left. Our movements are synchronized in complete opposition with each other. This is another simple clowning trick, the allure of magnetic bodies. Magnets attract, sure, but they also repel. It's the fight for connection that's so funny, I think. As the audience grows in number and the laughs grow as well, we always want the things that we can't have. Okay. To me, it was like very important to like everything I write. I consider myself a place writer. I grew up like kind of cut my teeth on Flannery, and like the kind of idea of the Southern grotesque. Also Dorothy Allison, who wrote like one of my very favorite place books that I was talking about earlier, Bastard of Carolina. Like that, like South Carolina is so bodied in that book, like cypress knees like feel like human knees, like, you know, like you can't imagine the landscape it does as much work as bodies moving through a place. So whenever I'm writing a book, and this book specifically is very Orlando in a way where I was like, I want this to be a view of this place that maybe people don't necessarily see from outside. And ways in which that the everyday there is weirdly funny in a kind of way, right? This kind of like beautiful smeary landscape of driving in a car through a place that like turns into like vacant lots, turns into like used car places, turns into cattle. Like, if anybody's seen the Florida Project, a lot of that is incredibly accurate. I kind of hate watched it the first time. Like I was like ready to go in and be like, this is, and then I watched it and I was like, oh shit, it's really good. It's got like a lot of that same kind of thing where it's like people out next to a theme park and there's all these like places, like tacky tourist spots, and then you go through some scrub and there's like a cow or something, like, because it's like we have a lot of pasture land. So it's like these things are beautiful and ugly and also desperately funny, and like sad and tender. So like all these things sit together. So I'm gonna read, how are we doing? I'm doing all right. I'll read like, time for 2 more little things? What do you think? I told her to like get the cane and like pull me off the stage. I was being crazy. Okay, I'll read like 2 more little sections. First of all, Riverhead let me write an entire chapter inside of an Olive Garden. They let me do that. They said yes. So thank you to PRH for taking a chance. Rituals established where we sit inside the order of things. Human beings love habit. We're creatures of it, littering our days with to-do lists and scores of check boxes. Routines give our complicated lives a semblance of meaning, regardless of whether our customs are something simple or incredibly complex. For instance, someone's daily pot of coffee at 7 a.m. might be just as significant as another person's 8-step skincare routine before heading off to bed. We return emails and texts, walk our pets at the designated hour, tune in for prestige TV on specific nights. Just finished watching White Lotus. We can talk about that later if you want. Enjoy Taco Tuesdays and Wind Down Wednesdays and happy hours. And not only do these rituals create value in our lives, but they also give us a sense of satisfaction. What better way to build serotonin than to manufacture situations in which we can strike a chore off our list, essentially mark the mission as complete. It's witchcraft for soothing our anxiety-riddled minds. Finish the ritual and you're safe. People like to find patterns in things and figure them out, trace the map of someone's psyche so that they feel they have a deeper understanding of the human mind. Consider Bunko, a clown and a fool, yes, but also a performer on display. When the crowd views my persona, they are laughing, sure, but they're also trying to figure out what makes it so funny. Even the kids in the audience become armchair psychologists. They all want to be the first to figure out what's really going on with the clown. It's perfectly natural. Clowning is a living, breathing, somersaulting metaphor. And I need the people to want to look at me, to examine me, to scrutinize my jokes and fears. It's entertainment, but it has to do with a lot more than that. My art has to consume them, but it's crucial that they think they've come to their realizations all on their own. My phobia of horses, like I said, Bunko's like a rodeo clown that's terrified of horses. My self-deprecating jokes, my earnest pleas for help when I know they'll just abandon me for the next shiny object. I have to make them care. If you really think about it, everything's a ritual. There's the ritual of applying the makeup and donning my costume, sliding the grease paint over the ridges of my face, building character from scraps. The act itself requires hours upon hours of intensive consideration and planning. And after the gig is over and I've removed my clown's face, I lay those clothes out on the floor in the shape of my body and let them breathe. It doesn't matter where I am in that moment, or if they need washing, or if they're a rental. The clothes have to lay out exactly that way immediately after the work is done. I'm honoring the work that happened, respecting the time and energy that went into my art. Bunko's still there inside the clothes, waiting to be put back on again, to move through the world like a giggling colossus. When I honor the costume, I'm honoring the art. Rituals are practice. When we continue to perform them, we're staving off death. And a lot of this book has to do with like the idea of grief sitting inside of a thing. I love writing about place, but I also love writing about families and like whatever iteration they are. Huge fan of like domestic narratives. One of my favorite books is like Rick Moody's The Ice Storm. A messed up book. It's a fun movie too. But it's like a book where it's like a family is like all experiencing things in like real time, and some of those things are happening together, but like the way that each of those people tell the story is like entirely indicative of like, oh, everybody in a household's an unreliable narrator. Like this is their viewpoint of this, like all deeply funny stuff, but deeply uncomfortable. And that book's also very sad. It's like a breakdown of like things happening inside of a family, but also like the death of a child happens in that book, like deaths of like many marriages and things happening. It's also a time of in America where things are dying, and people are like reconciling or coming to terms with like a lot of that stuff. So I think, I don't know, people are like, what's a great comedy? Oh, The Ice Storm. But it's doing something that I really think I like to think a lot about in terms of grief, which is like what role does grief play inside of humor? How does like trauma and tragedy inform things? Melissa Febos, who's a blockbuster writer, her new book coming out, Dry Season, is real good. I think that's gonna be on it's already on every list. She just did like 2 events with like Lucy Dacus and Nico Case. I'm like, okay. But she was giving this talk, and she's such a smarty, and she was talking about, somebody asked about like trauma and writing into trauma, and like what if I can't approach that thing head on? It's still too fresh for me, or I feel it in a kind of way even if it's been a decade. Like, how do I write about that thing? And Melissa gave this incredibly lovely thing where she was like, if you can't get in through the front door, you have to find another way to break into the house, right? Like you could get in through the chimney like Santa, you climb up onto the like, in the 2nd story window through a tree, you get in through the basement. And that's like another way of just being like looking at it from a different perspective or through another avenue is a way that you can approach that. And I told her after she was done, I was like, well, guess what, I'm stealing that. And I was like, it's also the same way for writing a joke or writing about comedy. Like these same, like grief and like humor touch each other, and there's reasons for that. And it's like tonally, these things all sit inside the same circle. So if you feel like a joke isn't working some sort of way in whatever you're making, be that like fiction or nonfiction, I would say even poetry, I think it's like a perspective change, tonal change. What's a different part of the house I can break into like to tell it? And I think grief is a way where I was able to like look at that very specifically through this. Like Cherry's brother's gone the whole of it, but he kind of sits inside of it as a ghost because he was like the one thing that kept her having a relationship with her mother, who she's nearly estranged from, because they neither of them like are able to communicate with each other. And the brother who is dead, who's always the favorite and the funny one, was like the kind of lubricant that allowed them to exist in a space. So that can be like funny in the ways where it's like, oh, uncomfortable dinner, but like the unfunny thing is like the ghost sitting in the corner of the room. But that ghost could also be funny if you feel like the ghost is cracking a joke. But grief is like tonally like how we shift it. So read one last thing, and then I'll let y'all ask me questions. And I want to go ahead and be like, it can be like any kind of question. It doesn't have to be about the book. I'm always like very open about talking about like publishing shit, money stuff, like whatever you want to ask about in terms of like agents and things. I feel like there's not as much transparency in all of these spaces as I would like. So anytime I get an opportunity to talk about stuff, I really urge people to ask me anything. But you can also ask me about book stuff too. Anyway, last thing. It's no big surprise that pain fuels humor. Suffering is relatable. Everyone has it tough. Watching someone else joke about their personal trauma makes our own hardships feel bearable. Jokes give us relief, like aloe smoothed over a truly wicked sunburn. And for the person making the joke, there's the control factor to consider. If we make fun of our misery first, someone else can't come along and make it hurt even worse. Our joke, our rules. First of all, we have to find the root of the ache. No matter how original an act might seem, all jokes inevitably stem from a painful source, the flotsam of our lives lifted from the world around us and collaged together to make something new. By the time I was 9, I'd already viewed dozens of bozo-like characters on TV. I watched Wrapped as they slipped on banana peels, rode tiny bicycles with their knees nearly pressed to their chins, and threw themselves down on whoopee cushions, like army men detonating a bomb. I coveted the laughs these clowns received. I cataloged their routines in my reptilian brain, scheming and plotting. But if we're discussing roots, I need to go back further. It all started with a well-worn Garfield comic book. My brother Dwight had already read through it, grown bored, and handed it over in lieu of buying me a birthday gift. And though I was very into Garfield at the time, what kid doesn't love a creature that's basically id personified, pure ravenous hunger and the unrelenting pursuit of pleasure? I found my real interest captured not by that fat orange cat, but by Binky the Clown, a side character who took up only 2 or 3 pages in the entire collection. Binky doesn't do anything all that new or interesting as far as clowning goes. In fact, as Garfield's antagonist, he's so outrageously annoying that most readers can't wait for him to leave. As a clown, he was hard and sometimes mean, but whenever he was in frame, he was in control of the joke, wielding cream pies and seltzer canisters with absolute authority. In a household where my brother could do no wrong and my mother barely tolerated me, Binky was exactly the kind of clown I wanted to be. After reading that comic book from cover to cover, I threw on some of my mother's lime-colored sweats, plopped a ratty yellow Halloween wig on my head, and hid behind a door with a bucket of water. And when my brother got home from school, I dumped the contents of that bucket on his head and yelled, "Hey kids!" just like Binky from the comic strip. It didn't matter that my mother screamed at me because I got the floor all wet, because guess what? My brother laughed. And that first laugh, that huge big one, the open yodel of his delight, has lived on inside me ever since. We copycat first, you see. We make the thing we wish to become. In creating Bunko, my clown persona, who's afraid of horses, yet wishes more than anything to romp across the wild plains of the Wild West, I also, of course, brought along Binky and his confidence, his colorful facade and sneakiness, his outright rudeness. And didn't I bring along my brother, too? If I'm being honest, can't I admit that he was the real Binky all along? An overwhelming presence, a guy with a too loud voice, occasionally frightening in his pursuit of getting what he wanted, handy with gags and pratfalls, charming as hell, sure, but also completely full of shit. I miss him like I'd miss myself. I'll always wonder what kind of clown I'd be now if he were around to see it. He's gone for good, that wonder of my childhood. The pain of it lives inside every joke I make. And the very worst part, that son of a bitch is always going to get the last laugh. All right, well, I'll stop reading there. Thank you for... That's the first time I've read that part. Thank you for letting me do that. Does anybody have any questions? I promise I'm easy to talk to, and if you don't, I will start talking to myself. Yeah.
So, I'm sort of interested in Aquarium Select
Yes.
3,
Yes.
the number. I'm sort of interested in sort of the drafting process of options for funniness.
Yes.
And this, and you can expand on this, of why you chose like Aquarium Select instead of like a dentist's office
Sure.
in terms of like maximum
Yeah.
funniness and so on.
This is a great question because I think there's a million different ways you could spin something like this. So for myself, an aquarium or exotic pet store is like, I mean, they're everywhere in Florida. So one of those things is like, they're as numerous as like a 7-Eleven. Like you can't like throw a rock without hitting like Pete's snake breeders or something. So it's like, but they're there all the time and you don't see them. And so to me, I was like, it's also a place that's like very feral and alive, even if things are kind of dusty and dead. So it was something that I was like, I knew I wanted it to take place in, because I also wanted her to be a character that's like living like barely paycheck to paycheck. Because there's like a lot of people making art in places are like kind of like doing that thing where you're counting out like change to put gas in your car, but then also like, now I need to make art and I need to be awake for it, even though I'm working like a job or 2 or maybe 3 in different ways. So I was like, I need it to be something where she's definitely not making enough money here and it's part-time, but that she gets to like goof off and be weird with her friend. And I was like, and it's also so fun to think about the things you can do with the different animals and like living creatures inside of those things, or not do, right? Like, I also was like, okay, it allowed me to be playful with the idea of it too. Like, was like, what can an exotic aquarium store hold and what shouldn't it hold? And I was like, what things exist there and what things are missing, like very noticeably missing. So it's like there are creatures in there, but sometimes like a thing that's happening throughout the book is like they also sell like gardening equipment or like mulch, and it's like, why do they sell this here but they don't like sell like other things? And I'm like, okay, because it's like a place that's like a little off kilter. Also, I do think naming things is a funny thing. I'm a person who, I think everybody has a different practice for like work that they name. I can't start a project until I've named it, and that's like an essay or a short story or a book. So originally this book was called Who's This Fucking Clown? And then I was like, Riverhead's not gonna let me put the F word on a book. They let me do a lot of things, but they're not gonna let me do that. And so then I was like, it turned into like, Who's This Clown? Because Who's This Fucking Clown comes from that meme where it's like the biggest insult in the world is to be like, who's this fucking clown? Because not only are they calling you a clown, they're calling you one of the lesser known clowns. So, and then it was like, then it shortened to like, who's this clown? And then it shortened to Clown, a novel. And so it's like, I think the practice of naming things can be like intensely funny, especially the winnowing process of that. So for me, I was like, I know this to be like Aquarium Select. And then I was like, I want it to be a number. And I was like, what if there's no Aquarium Select 1? Like there's Aquarium Select 3 and 2 and there's not a 1. And to me, I was like, that's so weird and why? And that's funny. So I also think like the process of like writing into this draft, like I thought about this book for a year, like I said earlier, and then I wrote it in 6 weeks and it's basically in its same shape. Like my editor had very little and like mostly was like, occasionally would try and like punch up a joke and I'm like, okay, stay in your lane. But it is like a thing where I do this with lots of things because also I'm a librarian. I have my master's in library and information science. And so I'm always talking about the fact that writing feels a lot like working the reference desk for me, which is that people come up and ask you something, and really, if you're doing your job as a librarian, you're not answering that question, you're figuring out the thing they're actually trying to ask you, and that to me feels like writing. I'm trying to figure out the thing I'm actually trying to write about as I'm working on it, and so quite often as I'm going through a draft, I find myself writing something in a few different ways, so that when I go back through, I'm like, that one didn't work, this one didn't work, that's the one. Like that works in that kind of place. It's like the timing is right, the description is right, it feels like it's in the right kind of place. And so some of that is the same thing as writing humor into a piece. You can feel where it lands and where it doesn't. And another big part of that, I think, is reading work aloud. I think it's incredibly important to read your work aloud. Like something I said earlier too is I spent like 8.5 years like working at a public library. I did like interlibrary loan half the time, and the other half the time was doing children's story time. And there's not a harsher critic on this earth than a child that you read to at story time. And so I think like learning to like read aloud, like your work is a way, like, because it can be deeply uncomfortable. And I think it's uncomfortable because we encounter spaces in our work that aren't working. Like when you hit like a stop or you hit a thing where like, that's not what people sound like. I don't know what that is, it's a robot or something, but it's not a person. Or like you have two friends talking to each other and you're like, why does it sound so stilted? Because that's not how friends talk to each other. So it's like deeply helpful, especially in a thing that you're hoping will be funny, to have like beats and pause and like space. Sometimes the thing that was also with this book was they let me move things and like block out words or like take up space, because that can giving like a beat can make something funny, even if it's something that's hard. I think we do the same thing for like you want a line to land and then you move on to the next thing, because it's like maybe makes it land a bit more to like just make them sit and think about it versus explaining something. And that's for tenderness and grief as well as the joke. So hopefully that answered it. I did my thing where I talked in a big circle again. Yeah.
Yeah, what was your research process like for clowns and magicians and the like?
This is a great question. My algorithm is effed up now. I get a lot of clown content. It was like several years of Googling things that you can't unsee. But like, so for to backtrack it, my first novel was a book about like a taxidermist. So I had to do a lot of very specific like taxidermy research, which was even worse for the algorithm. It's like, that's like, oh, like I'll be on the reference desk, like, and there's like, I'm like, how to like gut a pig or something. And then I'd be like, oh, I hope no one comes up behind me. This one was different because that one I was like, I wanted that to be like a practical knowledge of like what's the actual like kind of science behind like skinning an animal or something. And I was like, I wanted like somebody who does taxidermy to read that book and be like, yeah, of course she's done this before. The librarian in me jumped out. But this one, as I started researching, I think everybody feels like they know something about clowns to like some degree in popular culture. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna start doing research. Because I also wanted to know, I can know more than Cherry knows, but at this like point, because it's her thing, right? Like I'm not Cherry. I was like, she wants to know, I was like, she's gonna want to know history of clowning, but only to the degree where she feels like, well, that's enough. I know enough about this. So I was like, I almost was like, I had to stop myself because me personally, I would have gone down a rabbit hole. And I'm like, that's not who she is. She thinks she already has like a grasp of this, and so she knows just enough to be dangerous, I think. So some of it was like, this is a deeply physical book because clowning is deeply physical as an act. So I was watching a lot of videos on how-to of clowning. I watched a lot of stuff that was like, there's this one specific video where a guy in like a suit is standing, he's very serious. It's like a video from the 90s. And he's like very serious in a suit. He looks like a youth pastor. And he's like standing there and he's talking and he's like talking about like the physics of like how you would need to slip on a banana peel. He's like, here's what you need to do with your body. Your leg needs to move this way. And if you don't do this, you could hurt yourself, but also it won't be as funny. And he's saying it in this very dry like voice of like describing like how to do this kind of thing. And then he's like, now we'll see it in action. And he walks off stage and a clown walks in. And the clown performs like the action in this way where it's like, what? And I was like, this is psychotic, but it's like very interesting to be like, oh, like so much of like the clown is like the physical performance. And if you perform the physical performance the right way, you get the laugh from the certain audience, but you have to know how to like move the body for that audience because not every audience is the same. Like, so I did a lot of research into like, how does a body need to move in order for it to hit the punchline, because sometimes the body movement is the punchline for clown, quite often I would say. It's like, so I did a lot of that. Also, Googling a lot of like very terrible jokes. I thought I knew a lot, now I know a lot more. And it was like a thing where I was like, okay, this is the kind of like humor that this person is like invested in, because like a lot of clowning is like kind of discomfort. It's like making the audience feel a kind of way, but sometimes like the audience does it like not being able to control. Like I did an event in New Orleans for book tour, and my friend Jamie didn't tell me and like surprised me with like a clown band. I loved it. Isaac Fitzgerald was like in conversation with me there, and he did not love it. And not because he was afraid of clowns, I think he was like thinking that the clowns would behave in a certain kind of way. And I was like, this is the thing about this is like, absurdism is like, no, they're gonna keep going in a way that makes you uncomfortable, like they're gonna stay in whatever they're doing. This is like a kind of like over explosion of things, and it was like, it's very fun to watch the audience because some people really loved it and some people truly hated it. So it was like like performance art, right? Like it's for some people, it's not for everybody. It's for the people that get it. And so a lot of research of that kind of stuff, which is like maybe more ephemeral. We also have like a lot of performance art in Orlando. I write very specifically about Central Florida and the idea that like people come to Orlando as a tourist destination, or we're like a major hub of like hospitality, tourism, and like a place where people come spend a lot of money. But then people come and spend a lot of money and leave being like, that's tacky. And like the things that you do are tacky, when in reality they came and spent the money to experience that kind of art. So people have a lot of preconceived ideas, but it also means because we're a tourist destination and like a place that's like an entertainment hub, we have a shit ton of performers that live there, right? We have like aerialists, we have singers, songwriters, writers, like theater, we have like because this is all stuff that's there inside, like they're working their day jobs at the theme park so they can go make art somewhere else afterwards. So like artistry lives in abundance inside of Orlando, and the idea that people leave with is that like, look at this tacky shit that y'all have. And to me, that's like very interesting to explore through the lens of the idea of the clown, because isn't that the way that people also feel about clowns? So some of that became like just like talking with people I know who like work in like performance in Orlando, and that's a lot of different people. Like the concept of like making art and struggling and trying to make this thing that will have like a lasting impact, all while having people on the outside tell you that your art isn't worth anything. Yeah.
What's the best revision advice you've received?
Oh, I'm very much of the opinion that you can delete anything. I'm not precious with things in my work, and I very much feel that I can get rid of that thing, and if it's meant to be, I can write it again. And it'll be there in some kind of form that needs to be there. But I think that it can be scary to feel like getting rid of stuff, and I'm a deletion fiend. Like I'll go through something and be like, delete, 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 and then like, I'm like, oh, 13,000 words are gone. I've like deleted a giant chunk of this. You are the writer, and if it makes you feel better, because I think sometimes people get scared, then I tell people like you can keep like a living document that you can kind of cut and paste and put that stuff inside and be like, special things I need to keep so that you can feel that you can still salvage it. Trust me though, I would say like less than like 5% of the time you're gonna go into that document and get that thing out. Because I think the harder thing is to like learn, and this is like working a muscle too. It's like developing a skill to learn how to get rid of things that don't serve the piece. Like that can be like an essay, it can be a short story, it can be a novel. Like you're like trying to write in service of what that specific thing is. And sometimes we write things in that can be beautiful or interesting, but they're not in service of the thing we're actually trying to write. So I think like good advice is to be not afraid to delete anything, because you already made it, you can make it again if you need to. Yay!